Good evening, my little creatures of the night. Mr. Wendigo back again with your late night creature feature. Before we begin, I'm curious. Where are you listening from tonight? Alone in your room? Driving through empty roads? Drop a comment and let me know. I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now then, let's see what tonight's tale brings us. The library with no books. Every night you lose your mind. This is not a metaphor. Every night, as you slip from wakefulness into sleep, the most sophisticated information processing system in the known universe systematically shuts down the very faculties that make you a rational, reality-testing, critically thinking human being. Your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for logic and judgment, and the ability to distinguish real from imaginary, goes largely offline. The neurochemical environment of your brain shifts dramatically. Serotonin and norepinephrine, the neurotransmitters that keep you alert and focused and sane, drop to near zero. And in that neurochemically altered, logically defenseless state, your brain does something extraordinary. It builds a world. Not a vague impression, not a hazy feeling. A world, spatial dimensions, visual detail, characters who speak and move and seem to want things, narratives that unfold across time, emotional textures that can be as intense as anything you have ever felt awake, and sometimes more so. You walk through buildings your brain constructs in real time. You have conversations with people who do not exist and you believe every word they say. You feel fear and grief and joy and wonder with your full emotional apparatus engaged, and at no point do you question it. The dream is, for as long as you are inside it, the most convincing reality you have ever experienced. Then you wake up and dismiss it as nothing. The fundamental question of dream science has never been answered. Why does the brain, under intense evolutionary pressure to conserve energy and optimize survival, spend roughly 2 hours of every night constructing elaborate, immersive, emotionally charged virtual realities that the dreamer almost never remembers and that appear to have no practical function? After more than a century of scientific investigation, after decades of brain imaging and sleep laboratory research and neurochemical analysis, the honest answer is this: we don't know. The modern scientific study of dreams begins in 1953 in the sleep laboratory of Nathaniel Kleitman at the University of Chicago. His graduate student Eugene Aserinsky was monitoring the eye movements of sleeping infants when he noticed something unexpected. At regular intervals during sleep, the infants' eyes began moving rapidly beneath their closed lids. The movements were not random twitches. They were coordinated, purposeful, as if the sleeping infants were watching something. They extended their observations to adult subjects and discovered that these periods of rapid eye movement, which they named REM sleep, occurred in regular cycles throughout the night, approximately every 90 minutes, and were strongly correlated with dream reports. When subjects were awakened during these periods, they reported vivid, detailed, narrative dreams, roughly 80% of the time. When awakened during non-dreaming sleep, they rarely reported anything at all. The sleep laboratory became a window into the dreaming mind, and what it revealed was both fascinating and deeply puzzling. During REM sleep, the brain is almost as active as it is during waking. The visual cortex generates the imagery. The limbic system, the emotional core of the brain, runs hotter during dreaming than during wakefulness, which explains why dream emotions can feel more real than real ones. The motor cortex fires movement commands, which is why dreams so often involve running, climbing, falling. But those commands are intercepted at the brainstem and blocked from reaching the muscles, producing a temporary paralysis that keeps the sleeping body still while the dreaming mind moves through its constructed world. The dreamer is trapped inside. The body is a locked room. There is one further feature of REM sleep that researchers consistently noted and consistently moved past. The brain generates its own time in there. In waking life, your experience of duration is calibrated to the external world, the tick of a clock, the movement of light across a floor, the rhythm of your own heartbeat. In dreaming, there is no external calibration. The brain produces its own temporal framework, and that framework is not bound by the rules that govern waking time. Dreams compress hours of narrative into minutes of clock time. Brief dreaming periods contain experiences that feel like they span days. The dreamer lives in a time the brain creates, not the time that exists outside the skull, the time the brain decides to make. Most researchers noted this feature, filed it under interesting, and moved on. The dominant theory of dreams for the latter half of the 20th century, developed by Harvard psychiatrists J. Allen Hobson and Robert McCarley in 1977, held that dreams were essentially meaningless. Random neural noise from the brainstem, the cortex doing what it always does, trying to organize chaos into a story. The dream, in this view, was a narrative hallucination, a confabulation. The brain's attempt to make sense of its own static, not a window into anything, not a message, not a place. Just the screensaver running while the real work of sleep, physical restoration, and memory consolidation happened quietly in the background. The activation synthesis model dominated dream science for 2 decades. It still shapes how most people think about dreams. The dream means nothing. The dream is nothing. The problem is the data doesn't support it. If dreams were random cortical confabulation, you would expect their content to be incoherent, disjointed, devoid of meaningful pattern. Instead, dreams are organized, emotionally consistent, narratively structured, and often thematically connected to the dreamer's waking concerns in ways that are too specific and too frequent to be coincidence. They are not random, and something that is not random is not noise. Something that is not noise is something else entirely. Dr. Clint Hendrix looked at it and didn't sleep for 3 days. He was not a famous man, not then. He ran a modest sleep research lab, published papers that received polite citations, taught undergraduate neuroscience at a university that will not be named here at the request of people who would prefer this entire account had never been written. He was 41 years old. He had a wife named Sandra and a house with a detached garage he had converted into a secondary workspace because, as Sandra described it later, once Clint started working on something, he needed to be able to work on it at 3 in the morning without waking her up. He was, by all accounts, a careful man. That is what made it worse. He wasn't the kind of researcher who chased strange ideas. He was the kind who checked his data 3 times before he trusted it, who sat with an anomaly for months before he decided it was real. His colleagues respected him for exactly this quality. He was not a man who leaped. He was a man who measured the distance 17 times and then stepped across very deliberately. So when his colleagues heard, years later, what he had concluded, what he had built, what he had done in that garage at 3 in the morning, the thing that disturbed them most was not the conclusion itself. It was that Clint Hendrix had reached it. He started changing about 4 years before he disappeared. That is how Sandra describes it. Not dramatically, not in any way she could point to in the moment and say, there, that is where it started. It was more like the tide going out, gradual. You look up one day and the water is just further away than you remembered. He started working later. That was the first thing. He had always been a morning person, up at 5:30, coffee made before she came downstairs. Then he started staying in the garage until midnight. Then 2. Then she would wake at 4 and the bed beside her would be empty and she would look out the window and the garage light would be burning. She asked him about it. He told her he was close to something. She asked him what something. He didn't want to tell her yet, didn't want to jinx it. He smiled when he told her, and the smile was the real Clint smile, warm and a little crooked, the one she had fallen in love with 22 years earlier, and so she let it go. She let it go a lot over those 4 years. The garage filled up slowly. She only went in a handful of times because Clint preferred to keep his workspace his own, had always been that way, and she respected it. But on the occasions she did go in, she noticed the changes, equipment she didn't recognize, wiring she didn't understand. A reclining chair at the center of it all, surrounded by monitors and components and a web of connections that looked, she would later describe, like something between a dentist's office and a recording studio and something else entirely that she didn't have a word for. She asked him once, standing in the doorway, if it was safe. It doesn't do anything dangerous. It just holds a door open. She didn't ask what door. Later, she would think about that a great deal, why she didn't ask, whether some part of her already knew she didn't want the answer. The last normal night was an ordinary one, which is how last normal nights always are. They made dinner together. She did the pasta, he did the sauce, the same division of labor they had maintained for the better part of 2 decades. They ate at the kitchen table and talked about a neighbor's new dog and a movie they were thinking about watching, and whether the roof over the back bedroom was going to need replacing before winter. She noticed he was somewhere else, not checked out exactly. He was present in the conversation, responding, laughing in the right places, but there was a layer of him that was already gone. Like he was sitting at the table and simultaneously standing very far away from it, watching. After dinner, he helped with the dishes. He kissed her on the cheek. He told her he was going to go do a little more work before bed. Don't stay up too late. He wouldn't. At some point that night, she woke up reaching for him and found his side of the bed cold. She looked out the window. The garage light was on. She thought about going out there, decided against it, went back to sleep. In the morning, the garage was dark and the door was standing open and the chair at the center of it was empty and Clint was gone. What follows is drawn from the recordings and written entries recovered from the garage workspace of Dr. Clint Hendrix. They span approximately 14 months. The early entries are audio recordings, transcribed. The later ones are handwritten, the penmanship starting neat and degrading in ways that are difficult to describe without sounding dramatic. So we will simply say that the last entries required forensic document examination to read. The university has declined to comment on their existence. Sandra provided them herself. She wants someone to understand what happened to him, not to explain it. She is clear on that point. She does not believe it can be explained. She just wants someone to understand that it happened to a careful man, a methodical man, someone who checked his work 3 times before he trusted it. She wants that on record. Journal, Entry 1. Recording date, first session. Duration outside, 7 minutes, 20 seconds. Duration inside, subjective estimate, somewhere between 4 and 6 hours. Though I want to be careful about that number because my ability to measure subjective time in there is, obviously, the thing I am trying to study, not a reliable instrument for studying it. The device functioned as designed. Induction was smooth. I was present, then I was there. No transition I can describe. No sense of falling or drifting or any of the threshold experiences associated with normal sleep onset. Just a clean cut, one state, then the other. The space. I need to think carefully about how to describe the space because the vocabulary I have is waking vocabulary and I am not certain it applies. It is not dark. It is not bright. It is not either of those things, and it is somehow both of them simultaneously. There is no horizon. There is no floor in the sense of a surface you stand on, though I had a sense of orientation, of up and down, that felt completely natural and completely sourceless. Everything is present. That is the closest I can get to it. Everything is present. Every texture I have ever touched is somehow available. Every color, every quality of light, not displayed, not arranged around me. Just present, available, everything the space could ever contain, held just behind the surface of it, waiting for a word that never comes. The space contains everything without showing you any of it. I was not afraid. I want to note that specifically. I was not afraid. I was something else, something I don't have a word for. The closest approximation is the feeling of standing in a very large building that you know is full of rooms you will never open. Session terminated at the 7-minute mark per protocol. Recovery was immediate. Appetite normal. Cognition normal. I ate a sandwich and watched television and felt completely fine. I am going back tomorrow. Journal, Entry 2. Second session, Outside duration, 11 minutes. Subjective duration, I am going to say 2 days, though I want to be careful again, because time in there does not move the way time moves out here, and I am not sure 2 days is the right unit. It felt like the amount of time that would pass if you lived 2 days, meals and sleep and the rhythm of a life across 48 hours, all of that in 11 minutes. I spent most of it trying to find an edge. There isn't one. I walked, or did the thing that functions as walking, for what felt like hours in a single direction. The space does not change, it does not repeat, it simply continues. Every step is into new space that is identical in quality to the space behind you. I cannot tell if I am moving through something infinite or something that generates itself ahead of me as I go. Both possibilities are interesting. Neither possibility is comforting. I have started calling it the library with no books. That is not a perfect description, but it is the best one I have. All the shelves are there, all the architecture of meaning and storage and retrieval. Everything that a library implies, and none of the actual content, just the structure of it, the shape of the place where things should be. Sandra asked me tonight how the research was going. Going well, I told her, close to something. She made tea and we watched something on television. I sat there thinking about the library with no books, and I felt, for the first time, a small cold thing in my chest that I did not want to examine too closely. I examined it anyway. It is what I do. The cold thing was this. I had built the machine to answer a question about the brain and time. I had expected to find something strange and measurable and ultimately explicable, a phenomenon, a curiosity, something to write up. What I found instead is a place. Places have implications that phenomena do not. I am going back tomorrow. Journal, entry 3. Third session, outside duration, 18 minutes. Subjective duration, I have stopped trying to convert it to days. The conversion doesn't work. It's like trying to describe a color by its weight. The units don't share a dimension. I tried something different this session. Instead of exploring spatially, I stayed still, or did the thing that functions as staying still. I wanted to see what the space does when you stop moving through it. The answer is nothing. The space does nothing. It does not shift, or pulse, or breathe, or change in any way I can detect. It simply continues to be what it is. Infinite, available, present, and completely indifferent to whether you are moving through it or standing still inside it. I stayed there without moving for what felt like hours. Here's what I thought about while I was still. I thought about the fact that in waking life everything has stakes. The coffee is hot or it isn't. You are late or you aren't. The roof over the back bedroom is going to need replacing before winter or it isn't. Everything in waking life is embedded in a web of consequence and urgency and mattering, even small things. Even the most trivial Tuesday afternoon carries this weight of stakes. This sense that things are happening and the outcome is not yet determined and the outcome will matter. In the library with no books, there are no stakes. Not in the sense that things have low stakes. In the sense that the concept does not apply. There is no outcome because there is no process. There is no urgency because there is no time moving toward anything. There is no mattering because mattering requires a perspective that has something to lose and the space does not have a perspective. You do. You bring yours with you, and you stand there holding it, this small human thing, this bundle of concerns and memories and loves and fears, and the space simply continues around you in every direction forever and does not notice. I was in there for what felt like a very long time. I came out and Sandra had left a plate of food on the workbench outside the garage door. She does that sometimes when I am working late, just leaves it there, doesn't knock or interrupt, just leaves it. I sat on the step and ate it, and I could not stop thinking about how much the food tasted like something real. Journal, entry 4. I have lost count of the sessions. The written log has the number, but I don't want to look at the written log right now. Sandra asked me this morning if I was sleeping enough. I lied. 3 hours a night for the past 2 weeks. Not because the machine is keeping me up, but because I lie in the dark next to her and I think about the space and I can't stop. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say I can't stop. I don't mean I am obsessed in the way people mean when they use that word casually. I mean there is a problem I cannot solve and it is keeping me awake the way an unsolved problem keeps a certain kind of person awake. The problem is this. Every time I come out of the space, I feel the weight of waking life reload onto me. The stakes come back. The mattering comes back. The sense that time is moving towards something and the outcome is not yet determined. And for approximately the first 30 minutes after a session, I feel that weight acutely, almost painfully, the full load of it reloading all at once. Then it fades and I just feel normal. But the 30 minutes is getting longer. It used to be 10 minutes, then 20. Now it is reliably half an hour before the weight of waking life stops feeling like a weight and starts feeling like just how things are. Something else is changing too. I noticed it this morning over breakfast. Sandra was talking about her sister's visit next month, dates and logistics and whether we had enough room in the guest situation, and I was listening, genuinely listening. And at some point I realized I was cataloging the conversation, a thing observed, not participated in. I corrected for it. I asked a question. I came back. But the distance was there. I felt it. I have a theory about what is happening and I don't want to write it down yet because writing it down makes it more real and I am not ready for it to be more real. What I will say is that the space does something to the scale of things. Every session I come out and the ordinary world has contracted slightly. Not in a bad way. Not even in a way I object to. Just smaller, more local, more bounded, like standing in a room you know perfectly well and suddenly being able to see all four walls at once. I am aware of what this might mean. I am watching it, carefully. I have also scheduled 3 more sessions this week. Journal, entry 5. Sandra found me in the chair this morning. I want to record this accurately. I had gone out to the garage at approximately 11 at night, intending a short session, 30 minutes outside, terminate and return to bed. I came out of the session and it was 7:40 in the morning. 8 hours and 40 minutes had passed outside. I do not know how long it felt like inside because I no longer have reliable access to that information. The subjective duration and the outside duration have stopped correlating in any way I can track. She was standing in the garage doorway in her robe. She did not say anything at first. She just looked at me in the chair and looked at the monitors and looked at me again. I told her I was fine. She asked me what I was doing. I do not know why I told her that. Some instinct toward protecting the work. Some awareness that the honest answer, that I had lost track of time so completely that 8 hours had vanished without registering, was not an answer she would receive well. She sat down on the stool by the workbench and looked at the chair and spoke very quietly. She wanted me to take a break from whatever this was. A few more weeks, I told her. She told me I had been close for 4 years. I didn't have an answer for that, because she was right, and because close was no longer quite the right word. I was not close to an answer. I was close to something else. Something I didn't have a name for yet. The answer to the original question, whether the brain can navigate time during rapid eye movement sleep, had become less interesting to me than the space itself, than what the space was, than what it meant that the space existed. She went back inside. I sat in the garage alone for a long time before I followed her. She was at the kitchen table with her coffee when I came in. She didn't look up right away. When she did, her eyes were dry and her face had the particular stillness of someone who has been sitting with something hard and made a temporary peace with it. She needed one true thing about what I was doing out there. I sat down across from her. I looked at her face. 22 years of that face, and I knew every version of it, and this one was the version that meant she was not going to let me redirect or deflect or give her a partial answer and pretend it was a full one. I found something. I don't know what it is yet. But it's real, and it was already there, and everyone who has ever dreamed has touched the edge of it without knowing it. I need to understand it. I don't know how to stop needing to understand it. She was quiet for a moment. Are you still you in there? I told her yes. I was not certain this was true. Journal, Entry 6. I need to write down what I know before I go back in because I am finding it harder to hold on to the shape of it when I am outside. What I know is this: the space is not generated by the brain. I want to be careful with this claim because it is an extraordinary one, and I have checked this finding more times than I can count. The data is consistent. The conclusion is inescapable. The machine does not create the space. The machine does not even find the space. The space is simply there, the way a frequency is there before you tune a radio to it. The brain, during rapid eye movement sleep, has always been tuning itself to it, every night. Every dreaming mind in the history of the species has been briefly, partially, imperfectly touching the edge of it, and then waking up and calling it a dream and going about their day. The brain doesn't build the library. It borrows a room in it. The machine holds the door open so you don't have to leave. This is why dreams feel real, not because the brain is a convincing simulator, because what the brain is accessing is actually there. The content of any given dream is generated, assembled from memory and sensation and the noise of a sleeping nervous system. But the space in which the dream occurs, the substrate it runs on, is not a product of the brain any more than a television signal is produced by the television set. The set receives. The signal was already traveling. Here is what I cannot resolve. If the space is not generated by the brain, what is it? It is not nothing. Nothing does not have qualities. Nothing does not feel like anything. The space feels like everything. The space is the most present thing I have ever experienced, and I have been inside it for what subjectively amounts to, I believe, a significant portion of my life at this point. Is it the substrate? The thing the universe runs on underneath the layer we can measure? Is it the place where time lives before it becomes the specific times we experience? Is it something else entirely? Something outside any framework I was trained to use? I don't know. I am going to find out. Sandra has asked me to come to dinner tonight. I told her I would. I mean to. I just have to finish this one thing first. Journal, Entry 7. I don't know what day it is outside. I know that is an alarming thing to write down. I know what it sounds like, but I want to be precise about what I mean. I know approximately what day it is. I know the season. I know the rough position of where I am in the calendar. What I have lost is the felt sense of the day, the texture of Tuesday versus Wednesday, the way a specific date feels anchored to everything that came before it and everything coming after it. In the space, there are no specific dates. There is only presence. And I am finding, and this is the part I want to record carefully, that the space's way of existing is starting to feel more native to me than waking life's way of existing, not more comfortable. I want to be precise, not more comfortable in the sense of pleasant, more native in the sense of it is increasingly the default against which I measure everything else. Waking life feels like the deviation now. I ate breakfast this morning and the food was good and Sandra was there and the light was coming through the window at that particular morning angle and it was real in every way a thing can be real. And I sat there and I thought, this is real, and I meant it, and I also thought, it is so small. That is the word that keeps coming to me, small. Not in a dismissive way, not in a way that makes me value it less. Sandra is not small, what I feel for her is not small. But the frame is small, the frame of waking life, bounded, staked. Time moving towards something, outcomes that matter, everything embedded in consequence. In the space, there is no frame. I think that might be the point, what I was always going to find when I opened the door all the way. No frame, just everything, everywhere, in every direction, with nothing holding it in any particular shape. I had a strange experience coming out of yesterday's session. I was sitting in the chair in that first minute of reorientation, the world reassembling itself around me the way it does, and I looked at my hands. Just looked at them, the way the skin sits on the knuckles, the small scar on my left index finger from a lab accident 15 years ago, the particular geography of a hand I have had my entire life. And for approximately 4 seconds I did not recognize them. Not in a frightening way, Not in the way of dissociation or derealization as clinically described, more like looking at a word you have written so many times it briefly stops looking like a word. The hand was entirely familiar and entirely strange simultaneously, and then the 4 seconds passed and it was just my hand again. I have not told Sandra about this. I should stop going in. I know I should stop going in. But I need to understand one more thing. There is a quality to the space I have not been able to examine fully, because every time I get close to examining it, something in me flinches away and terminates the session. Something that does not want to be looked at directly, something that is not a thing exactly, but is more like an absence that has a shape. I keep approaching it and turning away. Tomorrow I am going to stop turning away. One more session, just to understand the one last thing. Journal. Entry 8. It isn't empty. I described it as empty in every previous entry. I believed it. Every session until now it presented as empty, as pure, infinite presence with no content, no direction, no intention. But empty is not the right word. Empty implies the absence of something that could be there. A room is empty because rooms can contain things and this one doesn't. The space is not empty in that sense. The space is what you have when you remove everything that makes emptiness feel like the absence of something, when you remove the framework that would let you notice a lack. It is not empty. It is prior to the distinction between empty and full, and it knows I am here. I need to be careful with that sentence. I am not claiming the space is conscious, not in any sense we have a framework for. I am not claiming it has intent or attention or any of the properties we associate with awareness. What I am claiming is that there is a relationship between my presence in the space and the space itself that is not the relationship between a visitor and a room. It is more like the relationship between a word and the silence that was there before the word. The silence did not know the word was coming. The silence does not have knowledge. But the word changes the silence in a way that reveals something about what the silence was. I am the word. I have been in here for what feels like a very long time. I do not want to come out. That is a new thing. In all the previous sessions I terminated when I felt I should. The desire to return to waking life was always there, muted but present, a kind of gravity pulling me back. There is no gravity now. There is only this. Sandra, if you are reading this, I want you to know that everything I did because I had to know. I have always had to know. You knew that about me when you married me. It is not an excuse. It is just the truth. I love you in every tense that love can take. I am going to go look at the thing that has no shape one more time. Just once more. Tonight. Sandra Hendrix woke at 6:43 in the morning to an empty bed. She lay there a moment, not quite awake, waiting for the sounds a house makes when the person you love is somewhere inside it. The house was quiet. She put on her robe and went to the back window and looked out at the garage. The light was on. The door was open about 6 inches, the way Clint left it when he was working, because a closed room made him feel like the walls were listening. She stood there for a minute, then she went outside. He was in the chair. All the monitors were running, steady green lines tracing patterns she had never learned to read. His eyes were closed. His breathing was slow and even, the breathing of deep sleep. He looked, she would later describe it, completely peaceful. She called his name. Nothing. She touched his shoulder, then shook it. Nothing. She checked his pulse, which was strong and regular. She checked his breathing. She lifted one of his eyelids and his eye moved beneath her finger, tracking, active, the rapid flutter of dreaming sleep. He was dreaming. She could not wake him up. 911 answered on the second ring. The paramedics arrived 11 minutes later. They found what she had found. Vitals stable, no response to stimuli. Neurological exam in the ambulance showed activity consistent with deep, rapid eye movement sleep. Not a coma. Not unresponsive in the clinical sense. His brain was running at full capacity. He was just somewhere else. The hospital ran every test they had. The neurologists were baffled in the particular quiet way that neurologists become baffled when the data is clean and the patient makes no sense. Everything was functioning. Everything was perfect. He was simply asleep in a way that did not stop. Sandra sat with him for 11 days straight before her sister made her go home. He was transferred to a long-term care facility 8 months later when it became clear he was not waking up on any timeline medicine could predict or explain. The staff there were kind. They told Sandra that patients in persistent vegetative states sometimes showed improvements years later, that the brain was resilient, that there was always reason for hope. Sandra nodded and thanked them and went home and sat in the kitchen for a long time. She went through his files that first winter, all of it. Every journal entry, every data log, every page of handwritten notes going back to before the machine existed, back to the early theoretical work. The first moment he had looked at the temporal distortion data and decided it meant something nobody else had thought it meant. She read all of it twice. She is not a neuroscientist. She is an accountant. She understood perhaps a third of what she read in any technical sense. Everything else came through clearly. He had found something real. The finding had pulled him in the way a current pulls a swimmer, not violently, just persistently, until you look up and the shore is somewhere you can no longer see. And he had loved her the whole time. That was threaded through the science, visible in every entry. Sandra left food. Sandra asked a question. Sandra's face at the kitchen table. Sandra, I am not sure this was true. She read those parts more than once. She did not forgive him. She did not need to forgive him. There was nothing to forgive. He had not left her. He had just gone somewhere she couldn't follow, and the door had closed behind him, and that was different from leaving, even if it felt the same in the 3 a.m. hours when the bed was too large and the house was too quiet. In the second year, she had the garage cleaned out. She could not bring herself to go in there herself, so she hired people and told them to take everything to storage and paid them not to ask questions. She did not look at the journal entries for almost 3 years. The first year, she visited him twice a week. The second year, once a week. By the third year, she had settled into Thursdays. She would sit with him for an hour and talk about nothing consequential and watch his eyes move under their steady private tracking, and then she would drive home. She never stopped talking to him on those visits. Her sister asked once if she thought he could hear her, and Sandra told her she didn't know, and her sister suggested maybe it's better to assume he can't, and Sandra looked at her and told her she had read his journals and she was not going to make that assumption. In the third year, a judge declared Clint legally dead at her petition. She did not want to do it. She did it because his accounts needed to be dealt with and his university pension needed to be dealt with, and the practical world keeps moving whether you want it to or not. She cried for 2 weeks after. In the fourth year, she met a man named David at a mutual friend's dinner party. He was a structural engineer. Quiet, steady, a man whose entire professional life was about making sure things held up under weight. She liked that about him. They dated for 7 months before she told him about Clint. He listened to all of it. He did not have explanations and he did not try to offer any. He just held her hand across the table and told her he was sorry she had been carrying it alone. She married him in the 5th year. She was happy. She was genuinely happy. She wants that on record too. She just never sold the house. She told David she needed to go to the house to deal with some paperwork. This was not entirely a lie. There was paperwork. There was always paperwork with a property you had owned for 27 years, a property that had been sitting vacant and carrying its taxes and its maintenance costs and its particular silence for 5 of those years. The real estate agent had been patient but was beginning to use words like timeline and market window, and Sandra had been nodding along and agreeing and scheduling appointments and canceling them. She drove out on a Tuesday morning in October. David was at a job site. She did not tell him she was going. The drive took 40 minutes. She had made it hundreds of times over the years, knew every turn, every landmark. The particular sequence of roads that shifted from commercial to residential to the quiet neighborhood where the trees grew old and close over the street, she had not made it in 5 years. She had expected it to feel different. It didn't. Her hands knew every turn. Her body knew every landmark. 40 minutes, and she could have made every decision half asleep. She believed this right up until she turned onto their street and saw the house, and her hands tightened on the wheel so hard her knuckles went pale. Their street. She had thought their street. The house looked the same. That was the first thing. 5 years vacant, and it looked almost exactly the same as the day she had left it. The neighbors had kept up with the lawn, bless them, and the paint had held better than she expected. The oak tree in the front yard had gotten bigger. Everything else was just the house, patient and unchanged, waiting. She sat in the car for 10 minutes before she went inside. The air in the house had that particular quality of long closed spaces, still and slightly thick, holding the ghost of old meals and old warmth. She stood in the entryway and looked at the hallway and the stairs and the kitchen doorway, and all of it was so completely unchanged that for one vertiginous moment she felt 5 years collapse. Felt herself back in the life she had lived here, reaching for her coat and the hook that still had her coat on it. She took a breath. She walked through the ground floor slowly, checked the kitchen. The mugs were still on their hooks. She had left them. She remembered making the decision, standing in that kitchen on the last day with a cardboard box, thinking about the mugs and deciding she didn't want them. Didn't want anything that would sit in her new apartment reminding her of coffee made in this kitchen on ordinary mornings, so she had left them. Seeing them now felt like finding something she had buried. She checked the back room, looked out the window at the garage, which sat closed and dark. She stood at the back window for a moment longer than she needed to, looking at the garage, at the closed door, at the small window on the side wall that had always let a sliver of light through when Clint was working late, that she had used to check on him without disturbing him, that she had looked through once and seen him sitting absolutely still in the chair with his eyes closed and thought he had fallen asleep at his desk and gone back to bed without waking him. She wondered now if that had already been a session, if she had looked through that window and seen him already gone, already somewhere else, his body sitting patient and empty in the chair while the rest of him moved through a space with no walls. She pulled herself away from the window. She went upstairs to take the measurements the agent needed. The door to the bedroom was closed. She was almost certain she had left it open. She had a specific memory of standing in the doorway on the last day, looking at the room, the made bed, the familiar arrangement of furniture, before she pulled the door shut and went downstairs with the last box. She stood in the hallway and looked at the closed door. The hallway was very quiet, that specific quiet of a house that has been empty a long time, not peaceful quiet, the quiet of something waiting. She put her hand on the doorknob. It was warm, not dramatically, not inexplicably. Probably the October sun through a skylight down the hall, almost certainly that. She opened the door. The curtains were drawn. She had left them open. The room was dim, the October light pressing thin and gray through the fabric, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust, and in that moment she saw only the shape of the room, the dresser and the chair in the corner and the bed, the shape in the bed. She did not scream. She said afterward that she does not know why she didn't scream, that screaming would have been the reasonable response, but what she did instead was grab the doorframe with both hands and stand there breathing. He was lying on top of the covers, on his side of the bed. His eyes were open. He looked like Clint. He looked exactly like Clint. 5 years, and he looked like the man who had kissed her on the cheek after dinner and said he wasn't going to stay up too late. His hair was longer. That was the only difference she could find in those first seconds. The hair had grown the way hair grows on a body that is still alive, past his collar, curling slightly at the ends the way it always had when he let it get too long. She had always teased him about that. She made herself walk to the bed. She made herself look at his face. His eyes were open, but they were not looking at the ceiling. They were not looking at anything she could identify. They moved, slowly, the way eyes move when they are tracking something that isn't there, following a path across a space she could not see. His chest rose and fell. His color was good, better than it should have been, better than 5 years of institutional care had left it. He looked, she said, like a man who had just woken up in a place he wasn't expecting to be. She called his name. His eyes kept moving. She sat on the edge of the bed, on her side, the way she had sat for 22 years of mornings, and she reached out and took his hand. It was warm. She held it, and his fingers did not curl around hers, and she sat there for a long time, not saying anything, just holding his hand while his eyes tracked something slow and invisible across the ceiling. She called 911. While she waited, she kept holding his hand, and she talked to him. She told him about David, which felt like the cruelest thing she had ever done and also felt necessary, that she was happy, that she had thought about him every day. She told him she had never understood what he was trying to do out there in the garage, and she was sorry she hadn't asked more questions, and she was sorry she had let him disappear into it so gradually that she hadn't seen it happening until it was done. She told him she had never sold the house. His eyes kept moving, tracking, following something through a space that had no walls. Then they stopped. He turned his head, not toward her exactly, toward the side of the room where she was sitting, toward the approximate location of her voice, something turning toward a sound, slow, deliberate, like movement that cost something. His mouth opened. She leaned forward. She was gripping his hand. He said her name. Not the way you say a word you use every day, the way you say a word you have been holding in your mouth for a very long time, keeping it warm, waiting to be somewhere you could finally use it. Sandra. Yes, she was here, right here. His eyes found her face. She could see them focus, the long, slow process of focus, pulling something very far away gradually into frame. It's still there, he said. His voice was rough with 5 years of disuse, but it was his voice, exactly his voice. All of it. His eyes stayed on her face, in her face, and she could see him working to stay there, to keep the distance collapsed, to hold whatever it was that was letting him see her. Sandra, it's still there and it goes on forever and there's nothing in it. She was crying. She didn't know when she had started. I can still hear it. His voice dropped. Something behind his eyes shifted, pulled back, went somewhere she couldn't follow. Then he stopped talking. His eyes did not close. They stayed open, stayed approximately in the direction of her face, but the focus went out of them the way light goes out, gradually, and then all at once, and they went back to their slow tracking, their patient following of something she could not see. The paramedics arrived 4 minutes later. He was alive. He was, by every clinical measure they could apply in that bedroom and in the ambulance and in the emergency room, in better physical condition than a man who had been in institutional care for 5 years had any right to be. His brain activity was extraordinary. The attending neurologist used that word twice, extraordinary. Dense, complex, organized activity across regions that rarely fired simultaneously, across patterns unlike anything she had encountered in 30 years of reading brain scans. He was awake, technically, responsive, alive and physically healthy, and his brain was running harder than most people's brains run during the most cognitively demanding work of their lives. He was just not, in any way she could find, entirely here. The neurologist pulled Sandra into the hallway outside his room on the second day and asked her, carefully, professionally, whether Clint had been involved in any unusual research prior to his original episode. Sandra asked her what she meant by unusual. The neurologist described her interest as anything involving the brain's rapid eye movement architecture, specifically anything that might have altered the baseline functioning of the prefrontal cortex or the limbic system over an extended period. Sandra confirmed that yes, he had. The neurologist asked if Sandra could share any of that research. Sandra told her she would think about it. She thought about it for 3 days and then declined. She is not sure, still, whether that was the right decision. The official report listed the event as spontaneous recovery from a persistent vegetative state of undetermined origin. It noted that the patient had been found at a private residence, origin of transportation to that residence unknown. It noted that the machine previously recovered from the patient's workspace had been disassembled at some point during the 5-year period by parties unknown, and that no components could be located. Cause of original episode, the report concluded, undetermined. No further investigation was recommended. Sandra visits him on Thursdays. He has improved, the staff say. He responds to his name more consistently now. He tracks movement with his eyes. He occasionally speaks, single words, fragments, nothing that assembles into the shape of a sentence. The staff are good people. They don't look at her with pity exactly, something more careful than pity. They can see the weight, even if they can't see the thing itself. They update her on small improvements with genuine warmth. He turned his head toward the window today. He squeezed a hand during physical therapy. He seems more present this week than last. She nods and thanks them and goes in and sits with him. He looks like Clint. He looks more like Clint every week, actually, which she had not expected. She had expected him to fade somehow, to become less himself as whatever was happening to him continued happening. Instead, the opposite seems to be occurring. The lines of his face are more familiar than they were 3 months ago. The way he holds his shoulders, the particular angle of his chin when he is looking at something that interests him. Whether anything interests him, she cannot say. She can say that his eyes move with more purpose than they did when she found him, less like random tracking. More like following something specific through a space she cannot see. She wonders sometimes what he is watching, whether it is beautiful, whether it is terrible, whether those two things are the same thing in there. Except once. 3 months after they found him, on a Thursday afternoon in January, she was sitting with him in the room they had given him, the one with the window that looked out at a small garden. And she was telling him about nothing in particular, about David's work, about a book she was reading, the ordinary texture of an ordinary life, and she noticed he was looking at the window. Not through it, at it. At the glass, at the reflection in the glass. She followed his gaze. She saw the room reflected back at them, the two of them, her sitting in the chair and him in the bed, the ordinary geometry of a Thursday afternoon. She looked back at him. He was smiling. Not the whole smile, not the warm, crooked one she had fallen in love with, half of it. The part that meant he had just figured something out, the expression he got when data resolved into pattern, when the thing he had been turning over finally clicked. She leaned forward. Clint? He turned from the window and looked at her, really looked, the long, focused look, pulling her in from far away. It's the same place, he said quietly. Then he looked back at the window. She sat with him for another hour. He didn't speak again. She drove home in the dark, and she did not tell David what he had told her, and she lay awake for a long time thinking about the library with no books, about a space that contains everything and means nothing, about a door that holds open in both directions, about whether coming back is the same as leaving, about whether he had come back at all, or whether what had come back was something that had learned to wear the shape of him while he stayed where he wanted to be. She didn't have answers. She went to sleep. And somewhere between waking and whatever comes after, in the 2 hours the brain spends building worlds out of nothing, she stood in a space with no walls and no horizon and no frame, and everything was present, and nothing meant anything, and she was not afraid. She was almost certain she was alone. Almost. Folklore note. The scientific study of consciousness and dreaming has produced, in over a century of serious research, a remarkable body of knowledge about the mechanism of sleep and almost nothing definitive about its purpose. What we know, the brain during rapid eye movement sleep generates experiences indistinguishable in subjective quality from waking life. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for critical evaluation and reality testing, is largely suppressed. The limbic system runs hotter than it does during waking. The brain generates its own temporal framework, one that does not correspond to external clock time and is not bound by the same directional rules. What we do not know, why, what the generated world is made of, where it goes when you wake up. Cultures that have not pathologized the dream state have historically treated it as what it experientially is, a place, somewhere the mind goes. The ancient Egyptians built temples called houses of life, adjacent to their great sanctuaries specifically to induce and interpret significant dreams. The Greeks practiced incubation sleep, lying in sacred precincts overnight to receive guidance from the dream state. Indigenous traditions across North America, Australia, and sub-Saharan Africa maintain frameworks in which dreaming is understood as a form of travel, the soul moving through a landscape that exists as surely as the waking one. The materialist framework that has dominated Western science for the past 2 centuries insists that the dream world is generated by the brain and exists nowhere else. The dream is a product, a byproduct, neural noise dressed in narrative. What none of these frameworks have fully addressed is the possibility that the materialist framework and the indigenous one are both partially right. That the brain does generate the dream experience, the rendering engine is biological, but that what it renders is something that was already there, a frequency that was always broadcasting. A library the brain borrows a room in. Dr. Clint Hendrix spent 4 years building a machine to hold the door open. The machine has not been found. The door, as best anyone can determine, is still open. Well, boys and ghouls, that wraps up another terror-ific tale from the vault. Poor old Clint. Such a waste of a brilliant mind. All that curiosity, all that careful, methodical, check it 3 times dedication to the truth. He wanted to know what the brain does when nobody is watching. Oh, so sad. What a shame. So mind-bendingly beautiful. Just how we fucking love it. Hit that subscribe button. New creature features drop every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Central. And trust me, the next one's even nastier. Leave a like if you're going to be watching the dark behind your eyelids tonight instead of sleeping, and drop a comment. When you close your eyes tonight, right before the dream starts, in that half second of nothing, ask yourself if it feels like something that was already there. Tell me what you find. I'm always hunting for the next nightmare. Until next time, kiddies, keep your fires burning and your eyes on the trees. This has been your late night creature feature. I'm Mr. Wendigo. And hey, look on the bright side. Clint was always going on about needing more time for the research, more time in the lab, more time to understand. Well, he's got all the time there is now, every second that has ever existed and every second that ever will, stretched out in every direction with nothing in any of it, just how he always wanted it. What a mind fuck. Sweet dreams, kiddies. Sweet dreams.